Yeah. All right. Well, my name is William T. Carson, and I'm an artist based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I primarily work with coal, and the coal that I work with is bituminous coal, which comes from a mine in southeastern Montana, which is where I grew up. My parents moved to Montana in the 70s. Actually they were trying to drive up to Alaska. They had this great plan of going and building a log cabin in Alaska. They just gotten married, and they started driving in a Volkswagen Bug, and they ended up getting stuck in a snowstorm in Bernie, Montana, and they ended up spending the next 40 years there. uh, yeah, it's so my family has lived there for a long time, and it's an area that's really very remote and quite rural. The main industry out there is coal mining, and then also ranching. So my family are ranchers, and I became interested in working with coal and studying coal more in depth when I was a senior studying studio art at Colorado College in Colorado Springs. At that time, I actually took some time off of school and went up to Montana to study coal development for about a month. And at that time, Arch Coal, which is at least at that time, was the second largest coal company in the US, was planning to build this massive new strip mine about 10 miles from my family's cattle ranch. And then they were planning to build 90 miles of railroad to connect that new mine to existing rail lines in Colstrip, Montana. Then they were planning to ship all this coal all the way across the Pacific Northwest, across the Pacific Ocean to markets in Asia. What I was interested in doing was going up there and kind of just witnessing this place and talking to the people there about this potential industrial development that was about to take place. So what my dad and I did was we actually took a horsepacking trip where we rode from the site where they were planning to build this new mine and then followed the proposed route of the railroad. So we rode 90 miles horseback over 10 days in November of 2014. And that trip really sparked an interest for me in wanting to understand coal in a new way and think about a new way to relate to it. Coal is one of those materials that I think many people have an idea of, and has this way outsized, reputation. It's that many people have never actually encountered the material, though. You have all these ideas of it being a politically charged material or something that's seen as destroying the environment, or something that has a historical family legacy for some people. And all those realities are real and valid, but I find that there's very few opportunities to actually just look at the material and observe its physical qualities. So I started working with coal in response to that trip and in response to that experience and to these ideas, thinking about how can we understand a material simply by looking at it. And really, I think this comes from experiences I had learning how to draw, where when you're learning to draw, I had these great drawing professors at Colorado College who would talk about how you have to really look and observe and see something rather than just seeing what you think it looks like. All right, so how can you get rid of your preconceptions when you're looking at something? And I'm interested in how those ideas relate to a material like coal, something that people approach with all these preconceptions. How can you take something that you think you know and recalibrate that understanding? I think that's at the core of what I'm interested in.
The actual process of working with it? Like, how did you kind of start to develop like the aesthetic that you're using, or the ideas that you're using?
Absolutely. In response to that horsepacking trip that I took, started thinking about coal, thinking about it as a material. And so when I went back down to college to finish out my senior year, I brought a bunch of just raw coal with me and thought that I wanted to just start playing with this material and responding to the material. So rather than going in with some idea of this is exactly what I want to make with this, I want to sculpt this or that, I thought I just want to kind of have a dialogue with this material and see what takes place. I started by actually grinding up the coal, and I was doing some watercolors with it at the beginning, doing some washes and watercolors. I was doing some two-dimensional works on paper that were related to maps and mapping. And at that time I was thinking a lot about, how can a map give you this false sense of understanding a place? How can seeing rectilinear boundaries laid out on a piece of paper, in what way could that ever capture the little nuances of a place? So I was trying to explore that through these two-dimensional works I was doing. Slowly but surely, the watercolors became more and more textural. I was building up these layers, and before too long, I was having these really heavy pieces, and it wasn't making any sense to continue working on paper anymore. And so I kind of had to, recalibrate my process a little bit there. And I realized that I was interested in trying to just take this raw material and present its raw beauty, and interested in this kind of area where you're creating a composition that almost looks like it could be naturally occurring, but is actually a part of this process of very closely studying how rocks might sort themselves in a gradient, or the way that on a riverbed you might have rocks that will sort themselves by size.
Right.
So I started working with the material in that way, and adhering them to these wood panels. And what I do now, what my process is taking these large raw pieces of coal, so actually taking like a kind of a small boulder and breaking that down. So I'll break it down into kind of a rough mix of coal, and then actually using gold sifting pans, then I sift out the coal by size. So then I have large pieces all the way down to fine pieces. I take the coal dust that comes from that, mix that with an adhesive, and that sort of acts as my mortar in creating these pieces. And then the wood panel, that's the substructure for it, I work on while it's laying flat. And I'll be pouring in the wet material and then actually placing all of the stones into it. So for example, the piece way down in the mine that's in the exhibition, to create a gradient like that, I'll actually be placing these larger stones. And it's a really fun way of working, because each stone that's then placed in there, the next one is a reaction to that, and trying to create a natural flow and movement between the stones. And it's a really rewarding way of working as well, because I like that there's an element of time and performance to it. Because the adhesive is drying, I can't go back later and say, oh, I kind of want this to be at a little different angle, or I want to change the composition this way. It requires commitment and a commitment to vision. And so I like that you can't go back and
anything that you want to talk a little bit more about, or kind of this specific place where these pieces grow out of?
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, relating to place is something that I'm constantly seeking as an individual. And I, so I was talking about how my parents ended up in Montana, and that's where I was born. But actually, I left there when I was fairly young, because it's so remote that there aren't really any high schools close enough to go to school. And I have two older brothers. So when it became time for them to go to high school, we actually moved to Kansas. And I lived in a small town in Kansas for a while, and then moved to a small island in the Pacific Northwest, northwest of Seattle in the Puget Sound. And for me, I think trying to build work using coal that comes from Montana and from this place where my family has this history is also tied into my attempt to relate to a place that I think is important to my family, and my family has this history. But actually for me, I really only experienced as a young child, and then, you know, occasionally through visiting it later on. And so for me, I think working with that place and trying to understand that place is intricately related to my own place in my family, and trying to understand my physical place in the world and in the West. But the thing that I love about working with coal too is that I think, as you rightly pointed out, these pieces are biographical, and I have a close personal connection to this material. But what I love about showing the work is that then you realize that pretty much everyone has this intensely personal relationship to coal.
Right.
And I'm always surprised and love hearing stories from people that'll say, oh, when I grew up in Scotland, I remember shoveling coal at my grandparents' house, and I remember the smell of it burning. Or I think that's something that I find fascinating about the material, is that it is all around the world, and it's affecting the world on a global scale. But then there are all of these individual personal relationships that people have with the material. And I'm really interested in that way that we relate to materials and have a really intimate relationship with something that, maybe isn't often talked about as being a relationship.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I'm attracted to is that everyone does have a relationship with it. But I found that in my own relationship with it, I was rarely thinking about the fact that coal is ancient sunlight that's been trapped and stored. And the coal that I work with is actually quite young as far as coal goes, but it's 60 million years old. And I love interacting with material that makes me think about deep time in that way.
Right.
And that, what a sort of miraculous thing it is that this is ancient sunlight that was captured by plants and has been buried and compressed under the earth for 60 million years. And then all of a sudden we get to interact with it and look at it, see the way that it reflects light. I think that there's something beautiful in that sense of time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of layers.
Mm-hmm.
Probably both like figuratively and literally, right? Like different layers like coming out of it. I know you talk about like you're not necessarily like trying to be political in any way or make a political statement, but I know like especially in the last couple of years there's been a lot of political conversations around coal. I don't know if you have any kind of other thoughts about that and how it connects with your work, because I think it can become unavoidable just because it's become so much part of our political conversation. I don't know, any thoughts?
Absolutely. It's a great question, and it's something that I think about often. I think there's something inherently political, you're right, in the very act of creating artwork with this material and creating a work with a resource that's often only appreciated for its economic value, right? Its value as a resource. I think there absolutely is a political statement embedded in the work saying, what if we appreciated this material for its physical beauty, the way that it interacts with light, or its texture and subtle bits of color? Is this a new way that we could relate to this material? and understand it as a path forward. I think that, that illustrates some of my own political beliefs about the material and just my understandings of it. But I do feel that I enjoy creating work that, or I aim to make work that people could connect with and relate to, no matter their political leanings.
Right.
I think at a moment right now where things are so divisive and people feel so divided, I would hope that my work could appeal to someone who is pro-coal and, is pro-Trump and wants to, that believes in that, and that they might get entranced by the work and that maybe it would, plant a little seed for another way that they might be able to think about the environment and relate to the material, rather than a piece that is kind of like coming at them so charged and saying, if you don't agree with me, don't look at this.
Right.
That's kind of some of my thoughts towards it, but it's something I love thinking about and considering.
Well, I think that's a great idea, to think of an approach where you are not creating that middle ground where people can have a conversation versus creating something that is divisive.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. Something where it's a point of dialogue and conversation, because I do believe that's how we can create change and create a more sustainable future, is through a dialogue rather than making someone feel ostracized. Right.
And building off of that question, or, one of the things I've been asking the artists that I've been talking to, since this Salina Biennial is specific to the Mountain Plains region, and one of the things that we want to do is to highlight the artists that are working within our region. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean to you to be an artist that works within kind of the Mountain Plains region? Mm-hmm. It sounds like you've maybe lived in quite a few of almost half of the states, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I know when I first learned about this open call, which was actually through the magazine, and I read the list of states, I thought, oh my goodness, I basically grew up in all of these states. Because I was born in Montana, lived in Kansas, then Washington, went to school in Colorado. After Colorado, I moved to Austin, Texas, which I don't think we touched on. Now I live in New Mexico. And I grew up on a lot of road trips. My mom doesn't fly, so we would drive all over the country in the summers. So I feel like the Plains region is very dear to my heart.
Yeah.
And is an area that I've, that's really my backyard and where I grew up. I think what I love about this region is this tension between the incredible natural beauty that we find all throughout the Plains region, stretching from Texas all the way up to Montana. This tension between that beauty and the incredible amount of industry and resource exploitation that's embedded in the history of the landscape and is currently taking place, and is taking place through development and urban sprawl. And I think that tension is what makes it a fascinating place to live, and makes it also really important time to be having exhibitions like this that consider it as a region.
Right.
I think too often we can break things down by states, but really thinking about something as the bioregion makes so much sense to me, thinking about what are these shared resources and landscapes that we have. And it's an important time to be considering the future of the Plains region. How will we work to preserve that beauty, to ensure that it's part of everyone's future?
Right. Great. What are some things that you have been working on currently, especially during this unique situation that we've all found ourselves in with the COVID-19 pandemic?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm fortunate to have a studio here in Santa Fe, and it's an old garage that's been converted into an art studio, and it's just just me in there. So luckily I'm able to still go and work, which I feel very fortunate for.
Yeah.
And I've been working on a couple of commissions at the moment in that space. But the other thing that this whole experience has made me think about is how can I use digital communication to share the ideas that I'm interested in and share the experience of these works. One thing that I find really challenging is that my work is very textural, and it's about the material.
Right.
For me, I'm really interested in the qualities of the material, and I think there's something about the presence of experiencing a piece in person that is so hard to recreate. But I am trying to learn more about how can we use social media and photography and video to share some of that experience, and can it take on maybe a new meaning by experiencing it digitally?
Right.
So that's what I'm interested in, and have been doing some playing around with the more digital experiences.